and welcome to the first episode of the Northern Roses podcast. We're on a bit of a rebrand here because we had a little series called Pub Politics, and there's a few episodes on that.
Yeah, we've moved from the pub into
Yeah.
where are we now?
The same place we were last time. So the idea of this podcast is to really talk through and explain in some detail, or maybe like kind of behind the scenes and thought processes behind the articles that we've put out. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Dr. Adam North, recently qualified doctor in philosophy, specifically in religions and theology, and I would say that my expertise is political theology, looking at issues like institutional racism, athlete activism, and various other structural issues that exist.
And I'm Henry North, and I'm a freelance journalist. So where shall we start? I guess we can start with the first of your series of opinion pieces that we've published, and that was to do with opinion overload, talking heads on Not the News.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll talk about what's kind of inspired, I think what's inspired our project here, which is to kind of build a left-leaning source of media, which is that the right-wing media dominates the ecosystem, and that's partly to do with ownership, who owns the media, which is predominantly right-leaning figures like Rupert Murdoch, Elon Musk, various others. There's not many left-wing billionaires who own media. You know, if you think about left-wing media sources, they're typically held in trusts and have a board made up of figures from various expertise who manage the affairs. So that's the same with The Guardian. The Scott Trust runs and manages it, so it's not driven on a profit basis like these other forms of right-wing media are. So I think our inspiration, or my inspiration, maybe you talk to yours in a moment, is to try and build an alternate media source, because we exist now in a space where attention seems to be everything. And I think that people need to be able to find voices from the left more easily. And I think there is a real political urge and will for more voices that are saying very straightforward things like wealth inequality is now at a level that is unacceptable. These are kind of simple principles that I think we want to talk about, and we want people to see that really if we seek to fix those things, we can live in a better society.
And my inspiration really is to, I guess, go out there and be a journalist and find some stories about being Manchester or Northern specific stories and have a tinge and a focus on that. And I published our editorial values on the Northern Rose, and I think for me that's kind of really what what I would like to get out of all of this is to kind of get push on from those foundational values, and for a big part of that it's the education. So trying to get people to understand really why it is that they think that way. So being able to think for themselves, really.
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah. Well, I think that's what this first article was about in many ways, is that now a lot of news media, and here, you know, I focused on The Rest is Politics just because of how big it is, but I think a lot of people consume their news from people who are not journalists, but people who are reading the news and then effectively sharing it. But, you know, in the case of Rory Stewart, who, you know, I am sure, and I write this in the pieces, I'm sure he is an intelligent man. But because he went to Eton and he went to Oxford, and he has a certain way of speaking and a certain confidence in what he says, I have noticed in numerous podcasts that he will speak with an authority I don't think is deserved or due. And to be fair to them, they do get experts on to discuss issues maybe they don't understand. But I think we exist in a media space now where local journalism is dying. So you have these big national media outlets that basically produce all of the news. And then you have an even bigger sphere of people who then just talk about that news. And they're not producing their own news. They're literally commentating on already made news. And this just leads to a situation where all we do is consume the same stories, and we're not getting like inspirational local stories. And this is I think playing into that feeling of crisis and feeling of like the country's going backwards and going nowhere, because we're not getting these feel good local stories anymore.
Yeah, so that is kind of like what we're trying to do here a little bit as well, is a bit of local journalism. And yeah, I think to really coin a phrase, it's political commentators, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
Which
yeah.
is kind of like,
The irony is, you know, are we ourselves just now talking heads as well? But I think, like you said, we're trying to avoid that.
yeah, and I think what also our point of view is we're coming from it like with a certain transparency as well, to say that we're a left-leaning, I guess, news organisation,
Yeah.
and there's no kind of that hidden.
Well,
aspect to
this
it.
is done for, you know, we're both interested in this. This isn't being done for profit.
Yeah.
This isn't being done to anger people, to cause you to basically what a lot of the right-wing media does is it winds people up with catchy headlines and, you know, focusing on groups who can be easily targeted for abuse, and it basically triggers people into consuming it or clicking on it. And we don't want to do that. We just want to try and talk about issues that exist and are important, and try and provide what I would say, and what I'm sure you would agree with this, is to just try and provide an accurate view or an accurate way of talking about it. And we're open about where we're approaching it from. Like, we're open about what change we'd like to see and what ideology that we support.
Yeah. So should we, now we've kind of addressed that, should we move on a little bit to, it is a related topic, isn't it, to say that, well, the next article was about flooding the zone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is something that I think lots of people, I would say, one thing I've noticed from studying figures on the left is that there seems to be a real lack of trying to understand what tactics have helped the right succeed. And one of those key tactics is flooding the zone. And flooding the zone is this idea coined by Steve Bannon, who is he's a right-wing white nationalist in the US, a really influential figure.
And he played a large part of getting Trump into power.
Yeah,
the first
exactly.
time.
Influential figure in Trump's kind of seizing of power. And he basically admitted to this strategy, which is to flood the zone, fill the media ecosystem and space with so many stories that the traditional legacy media can, and so this is talking about the big papers like New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, BBC, can only focus on one or two stories at a time. That way you can get loads of the things you want to do through, and you can reach people through just so much attention that you basically monopolise the ideas that are being discussed.
And it's not about facts, is it?
It's not about facts for the right, anyway. No, it's just about endless attention.
Yeah.
Like, Trump is and I think it's fair to say he is a genius at this one specific thing, which is staying in attention. Yeah. Like, he is never out the news cycle. And that's that he lies all the time. It's never true. It's just about always feeding the media beast and giving people something to read or something to watch, something to get angry about, something to make their day more interesting. And this is something that the left, I would say, when, you know, we can talk about the left maybe at some other point, but figures on the left are not as good at seizing attention. And I think it probably is harder if you're trying to give facts and give evidence and present real stories. It's harder to seize attention. But my article wanted to address maybe how that focus has to shift from maybe taking your time more to a flood the zone strategy.
And you provided some ways of doing that. Can you remember what you said off the top of your head?
No, I can't remember off the top. Have you got it there?
Yeah, I've got it in front of me. Yeah. So one of the things that you said was seize every news cycle.
Yeah.
So saying that maybe more of a proactive approach to news.
Yeah, yeah.
What does that mean?
I think that means is doing sort of what Trump does, right? Where you just need stories that, you know, they might not really inform people, but they could be funny. It could be anything. Like, for instance, Trump is able to seize part of the media cycle by posting a picture of himself as the Pope.
Yeah.
And that, for people on the left, maybe agitates them, makes them angry. His supporters, it makes them laugh. They think it's funny, and it keeps him relevant always, and people are always interested in that. And the left, I think, need to. This idea that the left don't have a sense of humour isn't true. Like, they do have a sense of humour. And Stuart Lee talks about this, is that actually liberals often have more of a sense of humour. They don't mind laughing at themselves. They just don't. Oftentimes, they don't like humour that discriminates or basically punches down, is the kind of cliche where it's against groups who lack power. But I think it's important to recognise that the right feel like they own humour, and the left, for me, need to realise that much of what people want is entertainment now.
I think a really good example of that was when Elon Musk did his acknowledgement of the crowd. Basically, he did his Nazi salute, didn't he?
Yeah.
And how did he play it off? Like, it was a big joke, and it was meant to be like trigger the liberals. It's like, well, it's just not funny. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, no, triggering the libs is like it's something that in many ways some of them live for that. It's like they actively spend their time trying to wind people up for fun, and it works. But I think like people like Ed Davey and certain other kind of quite smart political figures have realised that they're in an entertainment game now. People aren't reading manifestos anymore. They're not so interested in policy. They want someone who they can relate to, who they like. Politics was always about charisma, but more than ever, it's not about politics. It's interesting, in the previous US election cycle, there was about a 1 or 2 week media discussion where the Harris team said Trump never laughs, you never see him laugh, and the Trump team said Harris laughs too much. And nobody cared about the actual politics. It's about who laughs too much and who doesn't laugh. And, you know, this is all about the recognition that in a kind of attention deficit landscape, you need to capture people's attention in the fastest way.
Yeah, so that is how Labour would go about it. That's another question in itself, isn't it? But
it is, but I think it's not that difficult to find entertaining people on the left. So many artistic people are left on politics.
Yeah.
And so actually it's about getting those people onto the platforms to do that for you. Like, so many Hollywood actors are left-leaning, and I know that they go and they speak about issues and people say, I don't want to hear them speak about it. That's fair. No, you know, in lots of cases you don't actually want to see these people talk about politics, because that's the whole point. People don't want the politics. You need to see them do things in funny ways or entertaining ways that bring them to politics. And that's why for a long time these kind of satirical political sketch shows were really useful, because people would see these humorous clips that would bring them into politics. And that's why shows like Last Week Tonight, The Daily Show, these comedy news shows became so popular in the mid-2000s, is that people wanted the news in a easily digestible way.
Yeah, and that next article is really a more reactionary piece, if that's fair to call it, and that was about the local election in Runcorn, which UKIP won, and it was really a call for Labour to be more,
reform?
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, same thing.
yeah, reform one. And you, again, I want to use this word, proactive, and you were kind of asking for Labour to be braver and bolder in what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think you call on really an approach towards like more left values, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I made the claim, and again, I didn't back it up with evidence, because this is something that happens in journalism that disconnects it from academia, which is you often don't need to back up your opinions with the same kind of way. But I think the general public in the UK are more left than politicians take them for. There is more of an appetite for policies on the left. people tend to want a welfare state. They want the NHS. They want free education.
And like, no one's happy with poor transport, are they?
No, exactly. So I think there's an appetite for it, but this
Like getting ripped off with energy bills.
Yeah, but I think politicians are too scared. I think it's possibly because they think the media will turn on them if they start talking about wealth taxes or things like this. But I think what people want, and I like this phrase, is that courage is contagious. They want to see bravery more than ever now. People feel that politics is failing, and that's why you get this kind of turn to reform, who don't actually stand for reform but have the title reform, because they see some, again, people speaking out about the establishment. But I think what they really want is some bravery and some political courage to say, here's how we're going to change things. And Labour ran on a manifesto of change, but I think even though they are changing things, it's not seeping through. And that's the main thing, is that's where this flooding the zone strategy comes in as well, is that people have to start to believe and feel like their politicians, their MPs, are doing courageous things for them and making the world a better place.
And it's not really being translated, is it? Like, a lot of the news at the moment is very, very negative towards Keir Starmer. He seems to be getting it from every angle, and I guess some of that's coming from the winter fuel payments, which was a big one. So even from the left, they're not getting that support.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much winning going around at the minute for Labour, and I think part of the problem is that even if you go out with even if the policies end up being unpopular, as long as you have real ambition and you say, we're going to do this, or we want to do this, and we want to take big swings, even if it might not work or it might not end up being practical, that builds trust. Like, if you are prepared to take brave leaps forward, I don't think that success is the only thing it then depends on. I think if you fail, but at least you tried something different. I mean, I guess it depends on the extent of the failure, because, like, if you look at Liz Truss, but I think that was a situation where there was a real lack of expertise, lack of forward thinking. It was a real echo chamber situation. But if you have a diverse, intelligent team prepared to take big steps in a kind of towards a brave new world, I think people would back that. And really, in politics, you need time. 5 years is not enough time to actually change the situation. You need 10, 20 years to actually see real change. So I think it's important to set out a brave agenda and not just say, we're going to kind of have this Ming vase, we'll make you'll slowly see change. It's not enough for people. They need a vision. And that's what I think Keir Starmer hasn't done. He might be a perfectly kind of intelligent, kind of rational, pragmatic leader, but none of that matters if you can't provide people a vision that can make them think, we are making strides forward, something to live for, a meaning.
It's a bit ironic, or I don't know if ironic's the right word, or more coincidental, that you mentioned how long it takes to change things. Even when you go round Hume, where this podcast is coming to you from, the council there, they were talking about one of the big changes that they've made there is about resident-only parking. And it may sound like quite a simple thing, that just, put on the side of the road, only residents there. And it took them 3 years. Something that you think would be so simple and takes 3 years. And then what's an election cycle? 4 or 5 years? It's just like, to put things in perspective, really. So when you want like big wholesale changes with things like the NHS, like how hard must it be?
Well, that's why New Labour, their slogan was education, education, education. But the reason a lot of politicians don't think education is a worthwhile pursuit is because you don't reap the rewards of your policy implementation. So if you implement educational changes, it'll take like 10 years before you start seeing the benefits of that. So some other politician may then get the credit of your changes. And I think that's what happened with New Labour. Their educational changes, the Conservatives took credit for the literacy improvements and things like that. But and that's, you know, part of living in a sort of fragmented media landscape where truth doesn't really matter so much. But I think if you can provide people a vision, you can win. You can say, look, we are not even interested in taking credit for these changes. Like, we might not be in power in 10, 15 years, but we want to do this because it will make your lives better. Because we don't, you know, politicians aren't there for them. They should be there for you. That's the real issue, is that people don't feel their politicians are there for them. And that's why the door is open for these fraudsters and kind of charlatans to come in and say, oh, you know, we'll change everything, we'll make everything better for you. Here's all these simple solutions, and then they'll, you know, they're much worse. They're much, much worse.
So what you're really asking for is for Labour just to go for it.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Find an ideology and start to implement changes.
Well, it's a vision that's not just you know, it has to be, and this is an unfortunate state of the society and the media environment we live in, but it has to be catchy, has to be short and sweet. Like, things like Make America Great Again was so effective because Americans could remember it. They could remember it and they could repeat it. They could put it on a hat. And I think we need to and like education was so effective for Labour because it's simple and it's straightforward and it gets across what we want to do. And this is the critical task now, is finding that short, sweet message that provides a real hopeful vision for the future.
Yeah. So by the time this podcast goes out, I think I will have published my piece on the legacy of fascism in Spain on the Camino de Santiago and the scars of fascism also in Madrid as well. And there's some quite interesting components to that. I think it's quite a long read, maybe like 15 minutes. But there you kind of see like this spiral into fascism is never that far away. Because as late as 1975, Spain had a fascist dictator in charge. So, yeah, if anyone's interested in that, I would recommend them to go and read it. It's got a bit of history about Spain in there and kind of like what shapes the country today. I've addressed a bit about the Basque people because they're, in particular, you can see a lot of maybe left-leaning approaches, and then in the rest of Spain, maybe like a lot more conservative, and it's quite fascinating. I found it very interesting. So yeah, that's going to be out soon, or by the time you're listening to it, it will be out. And yeah, I think as this podcast goes on, we'll release a few more of like maybe from the archives, our pub politics podcasts, a bit more about kind of the educational side of things with, I guess, the theory, really defining what it means to be left and right. It's like an interesting dynamic for me because I was at a May Day march on Monday where it was basic Palestine parade. And there was a guy selling, I don't know, some kind of literature. And I asked him, and it was very anti-Labour. It was that Labour aren't doing enough at the moment. And I said to him, well, what do you consider the alternative to Labour? And he said, I think we should have a communist future society with a socialist government leading to like a great communist happiness kind of thing. And I was like, well, what he's done there is he's confused two ideologies there, really. Like, socialism and communism are different. So maybe as the podcast moves on, we can really get into the crux of what it means to be a supporter of each ideology, I suppose.
Yeah, and you know, maybe we can put forward what we think would be a sort of effective vision for the future, because, you know, there are certain ideas that I think are often ignored, like syndicalism, which is about, rather than state socialism, where the state controls companies and the means of production, as to use a Marxist term, controls, you know, factories and things like that. The workers actually own the companies they work for, and maybe if we all owned the companies we worked for, we'd be more happy. But these are I think these are good conversations to have going forward potentially.
Yeah, So happy to leave it there.
Yeah, let's call it.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and it was nice to get started, and we'll have a new podcast ready for you soon. Thank you.